rather a military term, and it represents a point that neither of the parties step forward or step back, unless there's a challenge or new refreshment or an augmentation. So in Syria, still we are lacking of experiencing a culmination point, but there are different dynamics, as you know. We have political dynamics, we have military dynamics, we have humanitarian dynamics. We have, as you remember from the latest question, we have an ethnic balance dynamic. So once you experience a culmination point in a certain aspect, sometimes you challenge the other. So in this panel, we will discuss what the current situation is, what could be the perspectives of the different representations in Syria, and we should understand actually the perspectives. So for this purpose, first let me introduce Mr. Musa. He is the Vice President of the Syrian National Government and also member of the Constitutional Committee. And Mr. Rami El-Douche, he is the President of the Tribes and Clans Council. Mr. Mohammed Vejih Juma, he is the President of the Syrian Turkmen Assembly. And we have Labib El-Nahas, representing very effective civil society group, co-founder of Syrian Association for Citizens and Dignity. So they represent different interests, different procedures, and also they can offer us an insight to offer us a comment on Syrian issue. And for this purpose, I will direct questions first for 15 minutes, it's strict, and later then we will have a Q&A session. And I want to direct the first question to you. First, you are a member of the political organization of the transitional government, as you know, and also you are a member of Constitutional Committee. Can you offer us an insight for the political perspective for Syria, and also what's going on currently for the Constitutional Committee, because they are working, and what should we expect? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for hosting me. I guess anybody that's following the Syria issue, the Syria file, the revolution from the beginning, and seeing how things have progressed over the last few years. As you know, the political process has been at a complete deadlock for at least 3 years. There have been the Geneva process, which included 9.5 rounds, saw almost zero interaction between, or negotiations, actual negotiations between the regime delegation and the opposition. The opposition was always engaging out of feeling the responsibility for finding a solution for Syria, engaging and going to the negotiations, which weren't really happening. So it's kind of a misnomer to call them negotiations rounds. And of course, as we saw things progress over the last few years, where we ended up with the Constitutional Committee, this reflects the progress and the developments that we saw happening on the ground. We saw an increase of the regime's practices in the different areas that it still maintained control of, a huge military escalation in the areas that were under opposition control, tightening of sieges in different areas to force people to submit to the regime, and we ended up with, as we saw in the end the last few years, as a result of these sieges, these military escalations in several areas, the so-called reconciliations. These are just named reconciliations. There was no true reconciliation. What came out of them was actually the forced displacement of more people We saw from Daraa in the south, from Homs and other areas, we saw people feeling forced to leave these areas that now the regime was using as, look, now we have reconciliation. What we're actually also seeing, and perhaps I think one of my other colleagues will talk more about this, the practices the regime continues in these areas. There's still detentions, people are still being treated like they're the enemy because they lived at one point under the opposition control. So these developments, as the areas the opposition controlled shrunk, we saw development in the political process. It's sort of forcing the two sides to possibly make concessions or accept what is available. As opposition, our policy was always, like I said, is to engage positively with any part of the political process. The development we also saw reflected in the international agreements or the relevant international agreements or Security Council resolutions. So we saw the change, for example, from the Geneva I communique of 2012 to the UN Security Council Resolution 2254, which was in December 2015, notably 3 months after the direct military involvement by Russia to assist, to support the regime in the military campaign. So we also can, if we compare the language and the process that is enumerated in the Geneva I communique, it's different than the Security Council Resolution 2254. 2254 lays out a process for for political transition, which involves establishing, now here we don't see the word transitional governing body. What we see here is a governance that is inclusive, non-sectarian, and that establishes the proper environment, that works on writing a new constitution. And I want to stress here that it says specifically writing a new constitution. That's also different from the Geneva I communique, but I don't want to go back and forth comparing too much. And then it works on preparing for elections in accordance with the new constitution under the supervision of the United Nations, and also talks about, in different parts of it, what are the humanitarian issues that need to be dealt with to be able to achieve the environment in which all of these can happen. Of course, this has been the basis of our work, our political work, our engagement with the United Nations since this resolution was issued at the end of 2015, and there was resistance. The regime was very careful, was very obstructive to the political process, did not want to engage, to the point that regime delegations, or even when they didn't show up, but the special envoy would possibly go back and forth between the opposition and the regime in Damascus, they would not receive any papers. They refused to submit or receive any papers through the Geneva process. But the only thing that truly came out of that, or was being worked on in Geneva, was the 12 living principles, which we saw later in the final communique of the Sochi conference in the beginning of last year, and now they're actually one of the papers that are in our hands as we work within the Constitutional Committee. In terms of the Constitutional Committee, there has been a lot of pressure on the opposition that this is the wrong step to start from. It doesn't, in the sequence that's even laid out in 2254, which if we look at it, it's actually written in a vague enough language that it can be open for interpretation, and that's the nature of this document. In the end, this is a Security Council resolution, so Russia had to accept it, and the other countries that also are involved and their positions might be different, had to accept it. So it has to be in a language and that can be interpreted by all sides and accepted by all sides involved. But truly, if we think about, especially if we go back to the Geneva I communique, starting with the Constitution may not be the correct first step. It is one step in the political process, and out of that we thought, look, the regime is anything that will bring the regime to the table, to engage, to show actual seriousness about wanting to engage in the political process. We will start from any one point because this could be the key that opens the door to a true political, to a comprehensive political process. But the idea is, we still believe that the solution in Syria has to be a comprehensive one. It can't be one piece is not going to solve any of the problems. We heard right before the launch of the Constitutional Committee, we were starting to hear some talk about, okay, if the Constitutional Committee is not working, the negotiations to go into the transitional governing body is not working, perhaps there are elections coming up, maybe that would be the way. That is not acceptable. The elections by themselves won't make the change that is needed in Syria for stability to go back to Syria, and stability in Syria is stability in the region, and what we need is also sustainable peace. Elections by themselves will never solve the problem of Syria. We have seen that over the last 50 years. We have a lot of experience in that. We know elections are not by themselves the solution. So we said, you know, the Constitutional Committee was truly, there was a lot of effort and serious work that went into it. From the United Nations, the Special Envoy's team, and of course the international sides that wanted to make it work despite the efforts by the regime and some other parties that wanted to obstruct even this process from this happening. And we went there as a delegation that is named by the SNC, the Syrian Negotiations Commission, with a high sense of responsibility. We had the expectation that the regime might try to evade making any advancements of actually engaging seriously in the process without any pressure from the international community and specifically from Russia. The regime would not by itself come and sit at the table. In the end, the regime considers itself victorious militarily. It considers itself in charge, and it likes this constitution it has. It enables it to do everything that it does. And even this constitution, which, you know, a lot of people say our problem is not the constitution, this is an okay constitution. As a legal professional, I'm telling you, it's not a good constitution. This needs changing. But even that, the regime is not respecting. So in the end, the constitution is not by itself the issue. They have no interest in changing it. But let's say that we went and we wrote the best constitution that could be written for Syria. What can we do then? Again, taking this constitution, putting it in this same environment is not going to make any difference. So it's very important to look at all the other parts of the political process. And in this sense, the constitution, if it's written, we will need to have a referendum. For a referendum to happen, which would be the first true elections process, or the first process by which Syrians go to the polling boxes, this requires certain things to happen before Syrians can go. We need a safe and secure environment, and we need to talk about what are the properties of this environment, and we need to create a reality on the ground that will be the right environment to implement a constitution by which we can have, for the first time in decades, true democratic process where people feel safe going and voting for whoever they want, and they have a true political life. So this can't be happening in a vacuum, the Constitutional Committee, and that's the reason at the end of the last round in which we came out with, at least, we were able to engage with the regime for the first time. We didn't come out with any results that are tangible, but the one result is that we sat and then the regime was forced to start listening to us about our ideas of how we see Syria. So we did request at the end of the round that officially from the UN that it starts the other tracks in parallel with the constitutional process, so we can start talking about the safe and secure environment, and also we can talk about countering terrorism in all its shapes and forms. But that has to be in parallel tracks so that in the end we can bring them all together for the comprehensive political process. So I'll stop here, and maybe then when there are questions.
Thank you, thank you. If I review your speech, I think the magic word that you delineate is people. Because you said for the regime, force people to submit to the regime, forced displacement of people, being inclusive, people being treated like an enemy by a regime, and a comprehensive solution. That means if you combine all these sentences and words, I think the solution is actually clear, because Constitution Committee should take people as the essence of the all workshops. And I think we should expect that. And in this sense, I think we should direct questions to the other guests, because Rami al-Dush represents all tribes and clans in Syria. So we have to listen what people is thinking in Syria regarding the ongoing political process, regarding security situation, or regarding immigrants. So I want to direct a question to Mr. Dush. As representing all clans and tribes, what is your perspective overall? And second thing, there were threats emanating from the non-state actors and terrorist organizations in Syria, like Daesh and PKK, PYD. How did they affect your daily life? And what's your expectation for the future? Floor is yours for 15 minutes.
الرحيم يسعدني ويشرفني أن أجلس بينكم متكلما متحدثا.
And addressing this meeting, I appreciate the efforts of the Turkish government and Turkish people. It's well known to all of us that the Syrians who are living in Turkey, we are feeling like we are living among our brothers and sisters. And I talked with the deputy or the vice president of Turkey, and he told me that we don't call the Syrians refugees. They are called refugees in Jordan and Lebanon. We call them in Turkey as brothers. We used to be one nation, and despite all the difficulties we passed through, we still as one nation and one ummah. But let me talk now about the tribal situation and conditions inside Syria. Most of the Syrian society is affiliated to tribes and clans, whether they are in the countryside and cities. And these tribes, they have a long history of honor and dignity. And these tribes aren't isolated to the Arab component, but there are other tribes for other ethnicities, and Syria is a mix and a mixing pot that has different ethnicities and and sects that live together for thousands and thousands of years. So and the tribes are always misunderstood as with lack of education and something like that. But in the tribes, we have many officers, writers, poets, and academicians who are from these tribes. For the Syrian tribes, they have suffered from injustice in the last 50 years, and the regime worked on dismantling them and creating sedition and strife among them, even between the members of one tribe. So even the house of one sheikh of a tribe, they have divided that house or that family to different families. So the tribes suffered from all these types of injustice and oppression, and after the regime is caused by the regime, whether they are Daesh or PKK or other groups, all of them are have connection to the regime. So the regime breastfed all these terror groups in their practices. We as tribes, we have suffered from injustice, and we are now fighting against this injustice. All the members of the SNA are from our tribes, or the members of the opposition are from the tribes, and they have offered huge sacrifices and many martyrs in the battlefield. And here I don't isolate anyone or miss anyone. All the Syrians participated in this fight. We as tribes, we reject the regime in all its shapes and forms, and we don't trust it at all. And this country cannot be stable if this regime continue be in power. It is an alien entity to this country. They are not part of this nation or of the Syria. If they are part of that nation of Syria, they wouldn't do this killing and the destruction of the houses, of the mosques, and the infrastructure. They have destroyed all the things that we have, we were proud of. They have destroyed them. So the regime destroyed all of this heritage, and you can see now this on TV. We are supporting the national integrity of Syria. We don't accept the division of Syria. We don't accept the losing of 1 centimeter of the Syrian land. We have stayed in Syria for thousands of years, and we will stay in this land. We will not sacrifice and miss any part of Syria. All of us are living in coexistence. The Arabs, the Kurds, the Assyrians, the Syriacs, the Ismailis, the Alawites, all of them are honored citizens if they believe in what we believe in. So the division of Syria is meant to harm Turkey. So what the operation Peace Spring aimed at is to create that belt to protect Turkey from terror groups. And YPG, the PKK, tried to create a terror corridor to isolate Turkey from its Arab sister countries. We as tribes, we believe in the national sovereignty and integrity of Syria, and we should live in coexistence and equal in our rights and obligations. And we hope that the Operation Peace Spring, we shouldn't make the spring as a spring itself. We should make a river out of it. It should go to all directions. And we hope this spring will turn into a river that will water all the people in the region. And we are proud of this operation. I don't want to talk too much, but I am the only person who is having a different custom or different clothes from you. I have taught, I have been a teacher for 40 years in my life, and I have taught many generations. I used to wear like you when I was a teacher in the school, and after the school time I used to be wearing this clothes. So clothes aren't an issue of difference between us. When when we talk to you, it's an honor to be with you. All of us are sharing the same ideas. The tribal people in Syria, the tribes, are looking for the full liberation of Syria and to bring Syria back to its civilizational position. And we will continue our communication with our Turkish brothers to be as prominent powers and states in this region. We should bring back the science and knowledge and civilizations similar to our ancient fathers have done to the history. There are many battles that we have participated in. So all the tribes in Syria, some tribes sometimes are forced to specific positions. For example, if they are under the control of the regime, we shouldn't take them as wrong. I mean, the tribes under the regime control, and also the tribes under the regime under the control of Daesh or YPG. So these people in power are forcing some issues on these tribes, but these tribes in heart, they share the same values. The Syrian people suffered from different massacres along the path of history, but all of these massacres aren't similar to the recent massacre since 2011. But until now, all the Syrian people, all the tribal people are fighting against this oppression, and they are working to achieve the national sovereignty and integrity of Syria, covering all the Syrian land from the Iraqi border to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the border of Jordan to we can't say Turkey is our border. We can say the Black Sea to the Jordanian border, because all of us are one nation, and we hope to achieve more communication. And our sister there, she looks like she liked the idea that I'm mentioning, but I am saying this sincerely to you and frankly. We are part of this nation, and we pray to God that this our Turkey is our harbor, is our safe haven after the support of God. I have read some articles for former directors of CIA. He said that we have only the only left power in the Islamic world, which is Turkey, and if we destroy it, we would destroy the Islamic world. And we can tell him that we fight against you. The Prophet told us Islam won't be destroyed. Islam will be strong in one place and weak in another place, and strong in another place and weak in another place. So all the enemies of our nation are emperors of our enemies, and they are our enemies. Thank you, guys. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this conference, and I am honored to be with you and to talk with you. Sorry for speaking too much, and thank you again.
شكرا لك.
Speech of Mr. Dush complemented your speech, Mr. Musa, Ms. Musa. So it was about unity and dignity of Syrian people, again having the people to the center of all discussions, augmenting or just offering a light to comprehensive approach of Ms. Musa. So we will go to the other guest right now, Mr. Muhammed Vecih Juma. He is the president of the Syrian Turkoman Assembly. And I want to learn the perspective of Turkomans and yours as well regarding the picture, the current picture in Syria and expectations.
Okay. Hello. Good day, everyone. SETA, we really highly appreciate this conference. Aslında SETA, sizler bizim gönül tahtımızda çok büyük, yeriniz çok büyüktür yani. طبعا في الآونة الأخيرة الكثير يتكلم عن إعادة الإعمار، والبعض يتسابق والبعض يقيم المعارض من أجل هذا الأمر. وبالتالي أنا بالإذن من السيد مراد أنا سوف أخصص حديثي اليوم عن إعادة الإعمار. طبعا اليوم نحن عم نحكي حول إعادة الإعمار، إعمار سوريا.
Of Syria. Syria, which has a cradle for civilization, full of history. Syria, our country, as Syrians, all of Syrians. Syria is our home country. It has been for many years, and it's going to be for many to come. Today we are talking about the most complex humanitarian catastrophe throughout history. We are talking about killing, destruction, displacement, and detention. On the other hand, yet, we have a chance to be in one hand. We are here together, you're listening to us, and we are talking about reconstruction. The reconstruction of Syria as a country. And it is important that we are talking about this here in Ankara, the capital of the Turkish Republic. This is actually significant. Today I am here from Euphrates Shield area. Yesterday we were attending a celebration for children in Al-Bab area. Before that we were also working with children in Jawambe. And 2 days before that the same celebration was also organized with the children in Jarablus. And now as we are speaking here in this panel, we have the same celebration in Afrin. So I'm talking about Euphrates Shield and Olive Branch areas and Bisa Spring areas as well. I'm here to tell you that some of these areas, specifically in Euphrates Shield and Olive Branch, they have schools, they have universities. 3 colleges have been established. We have colleges. The people are actually living, and more they feel more secure, more safe. Yet still those 3 areas, I mean that those 2 and in addition to Bisa Spring, all of them are facing the same enemy, which is committing crimes, unprecedented crimes of bombing. And I believe that you are aware of some of these practices in which targets the civilians all the time. The civilians are the target. Today we live in a world and under an international system that does not want, I won't say it's incapable, but it does not have the will to stop the destruction and the killing in Syria. We still remember, and I'd like to remind, that the United Nations and all of its agencies that are tasked with humanitarian tasks, they failed to bring medicine to besieged areas. That's why we need to talk, or that's why I hope that when we talk about reconstruction, these agencies remember what they did before. The world today ranges from those who are hasting and pushing towards reconstruction in order to benefit and reap the benefits of the military actions and to strengthen their military grip over Syria, and an example of those people is Russia. Others are holding on reconstruction till there is a political transition in Syria, and yet they are not providing any effective support for the transition, and we have Europe and the US as examples. And those who support reconstruction in parallel with seeking a political transition and preparing the a proper environment, and the example here is Turkey. We believe, and I say it here, that what happened in Syria is actually a systematic destruction that aims at realizing 3 steps. The first one, which is the demographic change, and it already happened. We have 13 people who were displaced from their areas. 6.5 of them are outside Syria. The rest are suffering the most inside. The world is actually facing this challenge. Hundreds of thousands are living in camps. They have changed the tents many times, but still they live in camps. The second step is the geographic changes. And for example, you probably also note the use of words such as Kobani and Rojava, those words that do not exist in our own dictionary. The third step is redrawing the borders of the Middle East, which means that now we are being driven towards a new international system, but it's not hopeful. The destruction and the displacement was targeted towards specific areas in Syria. If we take a look at the map of Syria, you will see that specific regions were targeted, its people and specific geographies at the same time. Some agencies are trying to prepare some statistics. We see that some villages were completely destroyed. They are wiped off from the ground. Some organizations document the attacks on hospitals, on schools, etc. This is something that can be documented. However, what cannot be documented is the destruction of the social linkages and the social connections among Syrians. What cannot be documented is the trauma that the Syrian youth now are suffering from. The reconstruction does not mean that we go back to 2010. It does not mean financial budget only. We need to ask who's going to provide it and who's going to benefit from it. To talk about reconstruction, we need to ensure that we are stable politically and when it comes to security as well. And to reach that, we need to have civil peace, transitional justice, and just regulations that ensures the return of refugees, including the youth, those with expertise, the academics, I mean the human resources, because they are the key for reconstruction. The regime, represented by al-Assad, declared very openly that their priority for the reconstruction is Russia and Iran and China as well. And here we have a big question mark. Assad regime is spreading the propaganda that reconstruction is or aims at rewarding its supporters and revenging its opposition. The regime has always used the oppression financially and politically and socially against Syrians. The regime is not seeking to deal equally with all Syrians. The regime is categorizing Syrians as opposition and supporters. Some of the decrees that were issued allowed or actually gave the right for the regime to seize the properties of its own people, and we all remember in 2012 63 and 66 in 2012 and law number 10 later. The regime also directs all of the UN aids towards its supporters, though the areas that support the regime are not affected by what's happening. So the regime does not aim at solving the social and economical issues, but rather to strengthen its grip and to punish its opposition. The Syrian regime is based and built on corruption, And this corruption is increasing massively during the revolution, including financial and institutional corruption, which could lead to the collapse of the biggest projects. When we talk about reconstruction, we are talking about budgets that exceed 250 billions and even more. Some are talking about even 400 billions of dollars. But I don't think that there's anyone who trusts this regime to handle this budget. We need reconstruction, but we need a political solution that is accepted to the public, and then we need to provide the reconstruction for all Syrians, and the regime would never agree to that. The regime is actually planning to build skyscrapers. Maybe you've heard about it, the Marota City project. The regime is preparing to build skyscrapers in Syria. Just imagine, the poor people are deprived from the aids provided for reconstruction. They are not able to go back to their destroyed homes and houses and towns. Others are prevented from coming back even due to political reasons. Actual reconstruction requires true and genuine changes, socially and economically, and requires reforms that will lead, but these reforms will lead to the collapse of the regime. Let's talk again about the return of refugees. Let's suppose that the regime continues in power. The first condition, or the main condition for the return of any refugee, is to surrender to the regime if they want to go back. I'm not talking about any livelihood situation. I'm talking about the dignity of the human being. In Paris Peace Forum recently, I was talking about the UN, United Nations before that, but I'd like also to note something positive here. The UN Secretary General said in Paris Peace Forum, we cannot have a stable and peaceful society unless we have equal opportunities for everyone and when the rights of everyone is respected. The regime cannot be part of the reconstruction, as I have mentioned. Some are trying to spread this propaganda. Recently, and I'm saddened to say that, even in the Turkish media I found some references to the fact that Turkey is trying to be a part of this reconstruction project. And or if Turkey wants to be part of this project, Turkey must have a closer situation or a closer position to the regime. But how could Turkey do that? Let me summarize. The regime currently does not have any power in fact. When we talk about the conflict over Syria, we need to note that there are some energy sources in east of the Mediterranean, and Russia, who committed destruction and killing against Syrians, and all of the Syrians know about that. Yet Russia holds an exposition for the reconstruction of Syria. Yet in parallel there is another exposition for the weapons that it used inside Syria. So just imagine, how could Syrians accept Russia as a partner in the reconstruction? Iranian militias, they are no better. Everyone knows their situation. Everyone knows their practices, the massacres they've committed against the Syrians, and what they are still practicing, how they are corrupting the Syrians on the ideological level as well. So the Iranians are not accepted by the Syrian society. We also have problem with the Americans and with US-led coalition. The Syrians still remember how Raqqa was completely destroyed and how many civilians were killed, and they were not regarded or taken into consideration. Currently, the US-led coalition supports Bayadeh and the PKK, who are a separatist movement trying to build their own separate country at our expense. So I don't think in reconstruction they will be accepted. Acceptance of by the Syrians is the core of reconstruction. It's not the financial aids. Now, I think I've been talking for too long, so I'll move quickly to talk about Turkey and reconstruction. I still have 3 minutes, but my colleague here told me that the Turkmen in Syria are part of the Tribes Council. I wanted to stress this here in public in front of everyone. Turkey and reconstruction in Syria. Turkey protected Syrians, received them, hosted them, and aided them. And yesterday, during the meeting between Mr. President Erdogan and Trump, the major topic was safe zone. And let's focus on the word safe, which was the core of the discussion. The safe zone is for Syrians, though the objectives for Turkey are different from the objectives that other countries seek in Syria. Turkey cares about this country that shares long borders with. We have more than 10 million people in both countries who are relatives. So the reconstruction and ensuring stabilization in Syria is the best way to fight terrorism in Syria. The presence of 4 million Syrians in Turkey and a larger number who live in border areas near Turkey in liberated areas. All of these are actually important factors for Turkey to have a stronger position towards Syria in the future. Turkey has the potentials, have the experience to conduct or to carry out the reconstruction, and it is accepted by the Syrians. Let's just think about the number of university graduates in Turkey, the Syrians who graduated from Turkish universities throughout the past 8 years. We have at least 4 generations of graduates from Turkish universities, and those are no doubt will be supportive of this partnership between Syria and Turkey in the future. The Turkish people and the Syrian people both are active, energetic, and resourceful, and they are looking forward to a political system that is built on the right basis. Finally, the international military direct and indirect intervention aims at serving the interests of other parties. And those countries no doubt will have or will request financial privileges in the future because they won't be investing in the war unless they want to later invest during peace. So what we need to do is to show them how it's in their benefit and how it serves their interest to invest during the peace. And I hope that in the future we will be able to invite you and host you in our liberated areas in the future. Thank you, and peace be upon you.
شكرا. بنية حديثك تركزت على إعادة البناء أو إعادة الإعمار.
Activity in Syria for a better future. And I think this speech also complements the next speech because Mr. Nahas will talk about 2 reports that they had published before. I have these reports and it's free, you can pick them up from the gate. It's about the living conditions in the regime-held areas and to what extent the people who were forced to immigrate from Syria or were somehow displaced people in Syria could go back to their original land or not. So I want to ask a question to Mr. Nahas. What is the situation in regime-held areas and what you have concluded in your report? And please introduce your institution, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks very much, Murad. First of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thanks to SETA for the invitation and holding this panel. First of all, as Mr. Murad said, I'll just give a couple of minutes of introduction to the organization or the movement that I'm representing here today. The Syrian Association for Citizen Dignity is a true grassroots civil rights popular movement that was founded by Syrians to serve Syrians. It is not an NGO, and it is not a body of the opposition, and definitely it does not have any political affiliation. The premise on which this movement was established was very simple yet very powerful. The largest constituency in Syria cannot not be present in the elaboration and definition of the political solution in Syria. And that largest constituency is unfortunately the refugees and IDPs. We're currently about 13 million people, and we cannot imagine that any political solution in Syria can have any legitimacy or even be effective unless the voice of those displaced and refugees can be heard. So based on that premise, we believed that in order to secure a voluntary, safe and dignified return to all refugees and IDPs, a movement, a popular movement, has to be created. And the final objective of this movement, in order to guarantee that kind of return with these conditions, is basically to make sure that any future political solution has to be a comprehensive, sustainable, and should have enough and robust mechanisms and guarantees to see through the implementation and the monitoring of these conditions of return. Based on that, we established a very strong belief that the issue of refugees and displaced people is not only humanitarian. It is humanitarian, of course, and we're not dropping that part. But what we're saying in Syria, in the case of Syria, this issue is political and can only be solved through political action and political will by countries and governments influencing Syria. So based on that, we started a long series of consultations with Syrians in Syria, abroad. We covered almost 7 countries. We had almost more than 400 outreach meetings. We established a model from bottom to top where we gathered influential figures, social figures in all provinces. And our tools in all that were very, very simple but yet powerful. And we believe that we introduced a new way of a civil rights-based movement in Syria. Those tools were mainly the mobilization of people, building legitimacy, advocacy, raising awareness, and effective political communication. The goals that we had in mind, being more specific, were first of all to stop any forced returns, stop any further waves of displacement, improve the conditions of refugees and IDPs in their area so they don't have to take forced decisions about going back to regime-held areas, raise the awareness of civil society and shake them out of apathy in terms of how much they can do in order to decide the future of the country, and ultimately having powerful, effective communication channels with policy and decision makers in the region and in Europe and in the United States, of course. I've just come back from Geneva, where the association is having a European tour where we're going to cover the main capitals, Geneva, Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, The Hague, Brussels, where we're meeting all the governments, the main organizations working on the Syrian issue, the ISSG, the Office of the Special Envoy, and we will be carrying the clear message of how the issue of refugees and displaced has to be the cornerstone in any political solution, and how this has to be implemented in the political track that is now ongoing. So without going any further, and I'm happy to continue that conversation outside this meeting, Back to the reports that Mr. Murad mentioned. Actually, and since the topic of this panel really is stability and reconstruction, we think that stability needs to be looked at with a lot of nuance. And this is exactly what we did throughout 2 reports that we prepared over the last 9 months. And I really encourage you to pick them up outside the venue and download them. They're available online. The grim reality that we got from those reports made us reconsider even how the gravity of the situation, not only as a whole, but specifically in certain areas. So without going into details about the methodology, but I'm happy to discuss it later, of course, we divided the areas that are controlled by the regime to 3 areas: areas that they had since 2011, areas that he captured through reconciliation, and areas that he captured by force, and mainly with the support of Russia and Iran. It was shocking to a certain extent to see the high percentage of negative feedback that we got, although it was expected, but it exceeded our expectation. For example, 64% of people who participated in our reports felt unsafe in regime areas. That number went up to 74% in the areas that the regime controlled since the beginning, since 2011. And that for us established a certain pattern that was corroborated later with more details when we looked at the percentage of people who got arrested. And actually that percentage was 64% of people that we interviewed, either they themselves or somebody from their family was arrested. But that's in regime areas that has been held since 2011. That number drops dramatically in areas that has been captured through reconciliation to 36%, while it drops further in areas that the regime captured by force. The correlation of all this data gives us the conclusion that the more time that the regime has to control an area and have stability, the higher the level of human rights violation there is. And that should be a very relevant information or data in assessing how stability can be achieved in those areas. Furthermore, when we discussed about the living conditions, because those reports, the first one talked specifically about the security conditions, about the living conditions, about the intention of people living in regime-held areas. The second report discussed more in details the reasons, the motivation behind Syrians going back to regime-held areas despite the big risk and threat that there is. So when looking into the living conditions, about 65% expressed that they thought that health conditions were either below average or unacceptable. 66% thought that education, which eventually turned up one of the reasons why people tried to go back to regime areas, also was below average or unacceptable. 79% of people said that they believe that there is an absence of the rule of law in the areas where they live. 71% of people who participated in the reports said that they have suffered violation of human rights. But the astonishing number really is that 97% of people complained about the level of corruption across all regime institutions. These numbers put no doubt and shed a definitive light regarding the level of stability, or more like it, the instability that there is in those areas. So it wasn't a surprise when we did the second report that 84% of people did not recommend others to go back to regime areas. 84% of people who returned to regime areas, they recommended others not to come back to regime areas. When talking about their intentions, we found that approximately 2/3 of people in regime areas are trying to leave regime areas if they have a chance. And the destination was curious as well. Roughly 30% wanted to go to Turkey, and another 30%, approximately in both cases, I think it's what, 31%, they wanted to go to Europe. So this is the reality of what's going on in regime-held areas, and this is just really a snapshot. I really, again, encourage you to look into it in more details. I could not memorize all the numbers and statistics, but that shows us that there are different realities within regime-held areas. We have to remember that the regime does not control all the areas. There are areas that are controlled by Iran, by Russia. Areas that have been controlled at different stages of the conflict have different realities, which tells us that the solution for stability cannot be off the shelf. It has to be very much tailored to the reality that we have in Syria right now, and it has to take into account the situation on the ground. So even if I want to go further, and this is something probably you know, and it's not in the reports, we've all seen what's going on in Daraa, what's going on in Deir ez-Zor. These are areas, in the case of Daraa, that the regime controlled for more than a year, and yet there's no stability. And actually, there are already some military operations, security operations against the regime. In Deir ez-Zor, we saw the demonstrations openly against the possibility of the regime taking over the city again. Now we're seeing in Hama and Idlib the threat of a new offensive against civilians in those areas, and on top of the 650,000 displaced people that we already have in Idlib due to the attacks, the Russian/regime attacks that started back in February this year, we are expecting another 500,000 displaced people if a definitive attack is launched against Idlib, especially if it comes from the eastern borders of Idlib, because those areas already have a lot of displaced people that already seek refuge in these areas, and this is happening right now. Even there is something worse. A silent displacement is taking place where Russia and the regime are bombing systematically, but at a slow pace, certain towns that are being evacuated by people because it is unsustainable to be there. So if all this tells us something, that we cannot really talk about stability unless we stop new waves of displacement. It is useless, it's meaningless to talk about stability when you're actually forcing people to return. The two reports that we did showed that forced return does not bring stability. Actually, it's the other way around. And also, if we talk about stability and reconstruction, we cannot be serious about that while we have actors provoking the displacements of hundreds of thousands of people. And in the light of all this, we have to ask ourselves, what type of reconstruction are we talking about? Let's not forget that the regime was actually against the return of refugees. And there are documented statements by regime officials threatening refugees who decide to come back. Let us not forget that the regime was against the Constitutional Committee, but in both cases, it was Russia that forced the regime to change the narrative about the refugees and to change the positioning regarding the Constitutional Committee. Unfortunately, the reason was not noble behind that. The reason is that they needed the Constitutional Committee and they needed the refugees to be back in order to have a legitimate political solution that will allow the reconstruction to happen and the funds to pour into Syria so they can save a failed state and they can save their investment in Syria. That's the reality. So we need to ask ourselves when we talk about reconstruction, is it a reconstruction that will reinforce a failed regime and revive it? Is it a reconstruction that will foot the bill for Iran and Russia's projects in Syria? Is it a reconstruction that will feed into networks of corruptions that the regime has established and the Iranians in order to benefit from that reconstruction? And the big question, who will lead the reconstruction in Syria from the Syrian side? All this takes us to two very simple conclusions. There cannot be any stability in Syria unless refugees and displaced people go back in a voluntary, safe, and dignified manner. And that cannot be guaranteed unless there's a safe environment. And that safe environment has to be in a through a political solution, a comprehensive, sustainable solution with robust mechanisms for monitoring and implementing and guaranteeing that this solution will be a reality on the ground and benefit from previous cases like Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. So the issue of refugees and displaced people, the issue of the safe environment is key to everything. Even now when Dima was talking about the Constitutional Committee, we need a referendum. And a referendum needs a safe environment. We need elections, and elections need a safe environment. We want the return of refugees and IDPs. We need a safe environment. And that is why we say that the refugees and displaced people issue is a political one apart from being humanitarian, but it only can be solved from a political perspective. So I'm not going to take more time. I'll just finish quickly. There's one last observation. The reconstruction part, or for the reconstruction part, the return of refugees and displaced people is a must. It is a technical necessity. Our reports show the decline of young people and educated people and people with skills in order to carry out that mission. So even from a technical point of view, now we have a unique opportunity. The displacement of millions of Syrians has given us a new generation, a generation of young Syrians that lived abroad, learned languages, got degrees, got experience, and most importantly, they got exposure to new type of culture, whether it's political culture, working culture, or even social culture. This generation, those hundreds of thousands of young Syrians, those can make the change that we need in Syria. So what we're saying is, please help us get our people back. Our mission in the association is to get our people back to Syria, but in a voluntary, safe, and dignifying manner. And I will stop here, and we have more time to discuss through the QA, and thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, civilians must be protected and cities must be protected. This is the prerequisite of two famous Latin words, Latin phrases, jus ad bellum and jus in bello. So if you just locate restructuring activities, immigration, IDP, I think it's more meaningful to give a meaning to these two phrases. Thank you so much for the contributions. And now, expecting questions for the answers from the most authorized, influential Syrian individuals representing different segments of Syria. Waiting for your questions.
My name is Esra Geçici. I am the Assistant Coordinator of the Syrian Turkmen Assembly. Thank you for...
المركز أشكركم على ملاحظاتكم جميعا وما قدمتموه. سؤالي الأول
Ramil Al-Douche, who is the representative of the tribes of Syria. Gallup International made a face-to-face survey in Resulayn and Raqqa recently, and this survey showed that 57% of the people agreed that living under Daesh would be preferable living under the control of Assad. From this conclusion, what do you think about the resurgence of Daesh in the areas previously it controlled, in the face of Assad regimes taking the control of the areas again? And my second question goes to Labib al-Nahas. He gave very valuable insights about the reconstruction process. I want to ask that the possible French future involvement in the reconstruction process, because there is one of the biggest cement production facilities in the world is it belongs to a French firm naming Lafarge, and it operated until recently. What do you think about the future reconstruction? Who benefits most about this process apart from the regime tycoons? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Another question? I think first let's have all the questions and later then we can answer them all together. Any other question? Please. İkinci sıra. Teşekkürler.
Hello, I'm Alexander Setnichenko from the Embassy of Russia. I have a question to Mohammed. I think you know better than others about the areas under the control of the Turkish army in Afrin and El Bab. What is really done now after these years? How many hospitals are built? How many schools, roads, and so on? Do you have the data about this area? And do you have any plans? Maybe you know better. Plans about the new areas, Tel Abyad, Ras Al Ain, maybe for the next year. How many schools or buildings you want to construct? And who invest money to these projects?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And also, small question to Labib. Sorry, when have you been in the regime-controlled areas last time?
Thank you. Any other question? No? Okay. Thank you. I think the first question was directed to Mr. Dush. It's about resurgence of Daesh. What do you think about it?
أولا من باب المقارنة الأخت اللي سألت أنه أيهما أفضل، أقول لعن الله كليهما، هما عملتان وجهان لعملة واحدة ومتعاملان ومتفقان وفي تنسيق بينهم.
The same coin. This question it could be asked. However, we feel safe and secure because during the last meeting yesterday between two presidents, US and Turkish presidents, they both agreed to fight ISIS. So we feel assured that ISIS won't occur again. ISIS is known as the regime to be a killer, to be a destroyer, and to have no respect towards the human life. In addition, ISIS claims to be a caliphate, and they claim to be similar to the Sahaba, to the followers of the Prophet. But this is far away from what Islam is. So we don't accept it at all, and hopefully with the help of the Turkish brothers and with the support of the Syrian National Army and the work and efforts of the Syrian tribes, with the efforts of the people who still have a high sense of nationalism and patriotism, we won't fail. The last incident that happened, or the last strike against ISIS, led to the killing of their leader, and then now even his followers are not on the same line. We have in the desert areas in Syria and eastern areas in Al Jazeera, we still have some cells or some individuals, but some criminals, they pretend or they claim to be from ISIS because the name ISIS strikes horror and fear among the people. So it was evident. We have some documented cases when some people were claiming to be ISIS, but they are criminals. However, this US-Turkish agreement and the continuity of efforts against ISIS makes us hopeful about the future and that there will be no recurrence of ISIS. Thank you. Is there another question to me? So in short, to compare the two, we would say both of them are bad. That situation does not help each of them. The internationals need to create a new enemy for the Syrians if they want to play them. شكرا لك. الآن ننتقل
The question is about restructuring activities in Afrin and plans for Tel Abyad and Rasulai. Floor is yours.
طبعا انا بدي اتناول الموضوع هذا بالاذن من السيد رئيس الحكومه الموجود. يعني نحن منظمه مجتمع مدني بالنهايه، والحكومه هي المسؤوله عن هذه الامور، ولكن نحن مشاركين في هذه الفعاليات ومراقبين لهذه العمليه، لانه نحن المجتمع المدني هو اللي بده يراقب تطور هذه الحاله بالشكل الافضل. في منطقه درع الفرات اكثر
area we have more than 500 schools were rehabilitated, and olive branch areas we almost concluded the rehabilitation of all schools. So the percentage of students dropping out of school is almost non-existent. As for the hospitals, I'd like to remind that with the launch of Euphrates Shield operation, there was field hospitals on the same day. There was mobile clinics. The units, the medical units, provided 75 patients. The capacity was to receive 75 patients. This was on the first day of the operation. So to talk about Chobanbey, we have a hospital with a capacity of 200 patients, the same in Afrin and Al-Bab. In Afrin it's 70 patients. Soon we will open Azaz Hospital, which also have the capacity of 70 patients. All of them are very well equipped. They have advanced equipment. I am a doctor. I worked in the medical field in this area specifically, and previously under the regime control we have never dreamed to have such hospitals, such advanced equipment. The expenses of these services, as for this question, everyone knows that the Syrian interim government is the one with the resources through the cross borders, and part of these revenues and resources are directed for the hospitals and the health sector. However, the backbone for this support is the civil society, and mainly the Turkish civil society. Many other partners are collaborating with us as well, but this is the backbone. With every visit to inside Syria, we note that there is a development. There's more institutionalized work. As you know, in the Euphrates Shield area, ISIS was taking control for almost 3 years. All schools were closed completely. There were no hospitals, no services. The same applies to olive branch areas. The PKK were seizing control. The PKK was focusing on the military side, on building corridors, on building fortifications, and all of their efforts was focused on that, not on the social and educational services or health sector. If we move to talk about Ras Al Ain and Tel Abyad, I can tell you that I visited both of those areas, and it is safe. And unlike what is reported, the Syrian National Army is actually very keen in minimizing any destruction or effect against civilians or civilian properties or infrastructure. We even established, as the head of the government mentioned, a martial court was established. It includes qualified judiciary people to follow up and hold those responsible for any violations accountable. The third day after liberation of Tel Abyad, we were there. We were visiting the area. We saw the hospital, and I saw the hospital. It was completely emptied. It was burnt down. The labs all burnt down. There's no equipment, etc. The situation was not very positive. However, we managed to overcome this and to work efficiently, and this is because of the very good capabilities of the Red Crescent, the Turkish Red Crescent, and the mobile units they provided until the hospital was ready, and the rehabilitation of the hospital started. What is really important to note is that however we move there, we see that there are tunnels, and some of the areas that were liberated recently or a couple of hours before our arrival, some mines were still exploding. So we have some mines hidden in strategic areas that are strategic for civilians. So there are similarities between ISIS and PKK strategies in mining and trapping some of the areas. What I'd like to say is the process or the operation is going very good, and we are very hopeful about the future and about the steps and about the establishment of local councils in those areas who will be very effective in administering those areas. Thank you. شكرا لك. دعني أذكركم بأن هناك تقرير صدر عن السيتا بخصوص إعادة الإعمار في سوريا، صدر في العام الماضي، لا أعلم إن كنت قد اطلعت عليه، ويحوي تفاصيل موسعة.
And at the meantime, there's a methodology over there. You can just check it. And this methodology may be applied to other regions in Syria. And we can help, if you want to, provide some guidance. We can provide guidance. Thank you. And the last question goes to you. There are two questions. The first one, who benefited most from the Syrian conflict? And the other one was about the accuracy of the numerics in your report. Here we are.
Sorry, I think the question was more of like who would benefit more from the reconstruction process, correct? Yeah.
For considering reconstruction, the biggest investment was made by French
Yes.
in Lafarge factory. Bearing in mind this, what is the possible future pattern of foreign pattern of the reconstruction? What do you think about this?
Okay, I'm not getting really the question. So, is she asking? Are you asking who would benefit more from the reconstruction, or
Yes, as a foreign actor.
as a foreign actor? Yeah.
Which country will be the biggest actor? What do you think about apart from Russia, of course?
Okay, so that part is not clear yet, and it's going to be defined when the political solution or the final political solution is agreed. And this is one of the key issues that I was trying to mention before. The way the reconstruction is being portrayed by the different actors and influential actors in Syria is totally different. If we take the approach of like the regime and the regime's camps and allies, Russia, Iran, then the process is very simple. Just give us the reconstruction money and we will feed it into our own programs and networks. And in that case, it's Russia and Iran mainly, and in second place, the regime. Now, we have to note that the biggest potential donor for the reconstruction in Syria is the European Union. So, from our point of view, and I'm talking from a refugee's point of view, if the reconstruction issue is used by the international community as a leverage on all parties in order to put in place the right structure in a way that a legitimate and fair Syrian party is leading the reconstruction process in Syria, then of course they're foreign actors and countries that will benefit from that, but A, the Syrian people won't be harmed, and that reconstruction process will not be used against the interests of Syrians. And in second place, there is potentially huge margin for benefit because if my memory serves me well, I think the number that the World Bank estimated for the cost of reconstruction in Syria is roughly $200 billion. So this is like 4 times the annual GDP of Syria. So unless that reconstruction happens in a proper way, we are afraid and we concern as refugees and IDPs that the reconstruction process itself is going to cause a lot of damage to us, and it will not translate into the creation of a safe environment. So it is a leverage that will pressure actors on the ground to take the right steps to create a safe environment, especially from security point of view. Bear in mind that return conditions are not merely security. They're related to political conditions, constitutional conditions, legal, judicial, humanitarian. So it's really a whole framework. As for, is that answer clear to you? Yeah? Okay, good. As for the gentleman from the Russian embassy, I think Mr. Murad read the real answer. It's not about when I left, but if you want to know when I left end of 2012 because I was forcefully displaced by your allies, the Syrian regime, and shortly after that they expropriated my property in Syria. I'm not sure why you're surprised, but I think it's a very common practice in Syria. As probably what links to is the legitimacy of the reports. I did not take part in doing the reports. We have a dedicated unit, the data collection and analysis unit within the association that has a very strong network inside regime areas. And probably the best way for me to clarify this to you is if I go slightly deeper into the methodology. Apart from dividing the regime areas the way that we described before in order to have a very systematic approach, we followed a very scientific approach in choosing the candidates for the interviews in terms of representing society, in terms of gender, in terms of education, in terms of age. And we focused on the age between 26 and 60 because those were the most vulnerable for security harassments due to their age and the potential of them being conscripted into the regime army. Apart from that, we used only researchers that have at least 5 years of experience, and we provided a informed consent both to the researchers and to the candidates. And informed consent means that both the researcher and the candidate has been told about the risk and the danger of being involved in this research, and we obtain their approval. Our communication with the people that we interviewed was either in person through the network that we have in regime areas or through secure communication, remote communication. So my involvement was not really required, but thanks for asking about when I left Syria. Yeah.
Okay, the final words. Still questions? So if you allow me, just 1 minute, please, and later then we will have 2 questions. Mr. Juma, just say for 1 minute. Yeah.
Okay. Only I wanted to add some digital informations. أنا بصراحة ردت أضيف بس بعض المعلومات حول حتى نتصور.
To add something to understand what is the budget for the reconstruction. We are thinking about 250 billion to 400 billion. The Syrian national budget was just $8.5 billion. So you can think the amount of money that will be pumped to Syria in the reconstruction Syrian. So all of this, you can think about the amount of the huge amount of money. Now the petrol production, we have discovered that the volume of oil of Syria, we have discovered that they are three doubles more than that regime used to tell us about the amount of oil fields that we have, and also the phosphate mines. They were sold to the Iranians, and in order to buy the seat for the president. Thank you. لدينا سؤالين. أولا لدي السيدة نور من ديال الصباح. واحد منكم يجاوب على السؤال، ما في عندي مشكلة. بما أنكم تمثلون الشعب السوري.
Diyeceğim. Petrol konusunda Vecih Cuma Bey de bahsetti. Petrol konusunda şu anda özellikle sahada Amerika ve Rusya'nın bunların işletilmesi ve dağıtılması konusunda sanki bir zımni ittifak içerisinde olduğu, en azından birbirlerini bu anlamda fazla müdahale etmediklerini görüyoruz. Bu efendim? Oh. Okay, so let's continue in English. So apparently we have seen Russia and U.S. particularly reconcile particularly on the oil issue. So we see that in Kamishli now, physically, and also other parts. So what is your take on the Russian-U.S. curtain? I mean, do you believe the fact that they agreed upon some secret deals? And this is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take the other question. I think from Greek Embassy. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nicholas Cooper. I'm from the Australian Embassy. I had a couple of questions for Labib, but thank you to all the speakers for their comments today. It was very useful. I wondered if you had any statistics or survey results on sentiment in opposition-held areas and in Turkish-held areas. And I also wanted to get your assessment of the feasibility of, in recent statements by President Erdogan and others, in terms of returning large numbers of Syrians to Turkish-held areas and to other areas in Syria in the future. And I guess that relates to, the sentiment in Turkish-held areas and how Syrian refugees in Turkey feel about returning. Thanks.
Thank you. So these were the final questions. Who wants to have it? Dima? The first one is about an alleged or covered cooperation of the United States and Russia on sharing the oil resources of Syria. This question is a bit, questionable though. Let me direct. Who wants to answer it? Please.
بالأصل الإنتاج البترول السوري هو كان 360 ألف برميل في اليوم. هذا ما كان
1,000 barrels a day. This was the announced. But now it's just 10,000 barrels a day. But after many facts were revealed, we have discovered that the number of wells that we can take oil out of them, and we have oil on the surface of Earth is 3 doubles more than the regime used to announce. And it was mentioned also that there are also gas fields, natural gas fields in Syria. For the Russians and the Americans' agreements in Syria, the Americans, they want the oil to serve their project in the region, which is creating a sedition or a new state in that region, or to finance that state. I don't know what to call that state, but they are trying to create that state in that region. We can put it under the title of PKK or YPG. And for the Russians, they have some interest in that because they suffer from economic crisis, and they want to add these revenues to what they are getting out from the regime side. So the direct question is that there is no agreement or understanding between the Russians and the Americans for the oil.
latest question of our Australian friend to Mr. Miss Dima. Okay, can you answer the latest question? Yeah. It's about statistics and feasibilities of returns to Syria.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So, in terms of what you call the sentiment in opposition-held areas, we're currently close to issue a third report that is focused on that, but the angle that we're looking at is, I'm not sure if it's the one that you're looking for. We're looking at what people really think about the return, and what is it for them that means a safe return or a safe environment. Because as we said before, it is illogical and meaningless if other countries and other parties are deciding for the Syrian people, what is it for them to be safe to go back, you know. So that we hope to issue pretty soon, and definitely we will let you know about that, you know. Regarding the second question about President Erdogan's statement about returning Syrian refugees to North Syria, I mean, first of all, we have to put that in a wider context. Turkey is hosting the largest number of Syrian refugees in the world, 3.7 million, and I'm sure everybody's aware of how the process went and how difficult, and they're facing threats against their national security along the border, you know. Having said that, our principle as a civil rights association is always that any return has to be voluntary, whether it's to a safe area or back home. And at the same time, any safe area should not translate into any demographic change or a displacement of people. Now, we focus on citizens. We don't care about any other background. For us, everybody and everyone is a Syrian citizen. So these are the principle or the lens through which we look at that, and we believe that Turkey is in line with that view so far, you know. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to direct the first question to Mr. Dush, because it's an allegation that there may be a covered agreement between the United States and Russia on sharing the oil resources of Syria. Do you believe in that, or is there any perception in the minds of Syrian public?
Regarding the U.S., they won't accept the Russians to be their opponent. They are focusing on the oil, parts of Deir ez-Zor and parts of Hasaka province, and they have mentioned this many times, including President Trump. The region or the area, as Dr. mentioned, they will help the state they are looking to create. The region is not related to YPG or the SDF. All of this area, parts of the Khabur River, is south of Hasaka. I say this state cannot be established in these areas because all of them are Arab tribes, and there is no representation for these militias or YPG militias. These tribes are well connected to each other, and they would refuse the creating of that state. Let's talk now about the Kurdish areas that are close to the Turkish border. But part of that area is fixed with the Operation Peace Spring. So Russia might control, the possibility of Russian control of the oil in that area is so low, but the US troops are on the ground and they are controlling these wells. And the proof for that is that when they announced their withdrawal, they returned some of their convoys to Omar oil field and Shpisa oil field and other fields. And all of them are close to Hasaka, north of the Euphrates River. So the US is controlling the biggest portion of oil in eastern Syria. Thank you. Shukran.
شكرا. سأوجه السؤال الأخير للسيدة ديما لأننا بحاجة لأن نسمع وجهة نظر السيدات في الأزمة السورية أيضا. أنت عضو في اللجنة الدستورية، لذا أعتقد أنه ينبغي أن تختتمي هذه
الجلسة. to our guests.
Okay. Thank you very much. I guess, you know, I just wanted to add a few points about the Constitutional Committee, which didn't get its fair share from when I started talking. Sorry. So I just want to stress again the importance of all the parts that go into the political process. Now, when we're talking about the Constitutional Committee, what's guiding our work as the opposition is the demands of the Syrian people when they took to the streets in 2011. Yes, they didn't go out demanding constitutional change, but their demands can be translated into constitutional concepts. We also need to mend all the problems that have risen to the surface over the last 8-9 years as a result of the ongoing conflict. But at the same time, we need to remember that none of this can become alive unless there are true steps to make people feel safe and secure. I want to stress again what Labib had gone into detail in discussing the safe and neutral environment, the security that people need to feel to truly reach this sustainable peace, a political solution that actually does resolve the conflict, and we can start the healing process. Transitional justice is a very important concept. These are things that we're putting all on the table when we're talking in the Constitutional Committee, even though it's about transitional period, but you know, constitutions have transitional provisions that when they're coming out of conflicts. And what's really important is also with all the pressure that we're facing from the Syrian people who are living one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in recent history, we all need to work to make sure that they're safe as much as possible now. So the ceasefire is very important in all parts of Syria. This will be the first step to go into all the other things that we talked about, including the security, the safety, return of refugees and IDPs, which we always stress it has to be dignified and voluntary. And you know, I always like to conclude with what I think is one of the most important issues, one of the most important dossiers. It's the detainees. These are the forgotten people. These are the people that are dying a million times every day, and their families are waiting to hear about them, about what happened to them, their fate. We hear every day about more and more people that are dying under torture in detention centers. So this is also another issue that really needs to be resolved for us to start thinking that maybe we can trust each other again as Syrians and truly engage in a political solution to end this almost decade-long conflict.
Thank you so much. A very good point, the latest one. Thank you for, I thank you all for participation, and next time maybe. Thank you. Bye-bye.